The views expressed by myself and the guests of this podcast do not reflect the official policy or position of the U.S. Air Force, Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. Welcome to White Coat Warriors. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Myers. And on this podcast, we talk about human performance optimization and training paradigms for you, the young medical professionals, and how you can use it in your own professional practices to help yourselves and your clients. Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting episode of White Coat Warriors, where human performance meets medicine. We have a great one today, but before we get into it, if you're liking what we're doing here on the podcast, give us a like, tickle that bell, give us a 5-star rating, no matter what platform you're using. Every little bit helps us out. And man, it's been a great season so far, but it just keeps getting better. Today, man, we got a superstar here with us today. We got professional Ironman athlete and medical student, full-time medical student at one of the best universities in the world. Even though I went to West Point, I'm still an Ohio State Buckeye through and through. Matthew Marquardt, how you doing, man?
Good. Thanks so much for having me, Chris. Been looking forward to this.
Same here. OH.
IO, baby.
Yeah, Buckeyes through and through. And for you Michigan fans out there, it's the Ohio State. So the Ohio State University. So I love it. So Matt, man, you got a resume that is just impressive. Where your undergrad, right? Let's talk about your undergrad first. Where'd you go and what'd you do there? Because you have such a diverse background.
Yeah. So I went to Princeton University for undergrad, where I was a varsity swimmer for all 4 years. And I majored in chemistry and got a minor in entrepreneurship.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, you're already hitting it out of the park. And now you're a med student at Ohio State. And I also mentioned you're a professional athlete where you set one of the top records for the fastest Ironman in Ironman, Texas a few years ago. And you're an Ironman world champion as well. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, so it's been a crazy last couple of years. I actually really stumbled into triathlon. I graduated from college in the spring of 2021. And at that point, COVID had really kind of derailed my senior season. And at that point, I honestly was kind of at peace with being done as an athlete and was ready to move on to the next phase of my life, which was becoming a physician, because I started med school in the fall of 2021. But I kind of just had kind of a whim and decided to sign up for a half Ironman, mainly just to have something to train for and something so that I could stay in shape for graduation. And delay the post-athlete body from developing too quickly. And so I signed up for half Ironman and actually ended up doing really, really well. And I got 4th out of 1,400 people in my first race. And so at that point, that qualified me for the half Ironman World Championships. And my coach, I did have a coach because I decided that it was more efficient to have an expert train me than just kind of doing it myself. And he was like pleading for me to stick with it. And I was like, nah, like I'm going to med school. Like I'm fine being done as an athlete. Like there's no way this will lead to anything. But so he convinced me to do the half Ironman World Championships as an age grouper. Because that was 6 weeks into med school. And I was like, you know what?
Yeah. Wow.
I can sacrifice 6 weeks. Like it's not that bad. 6 weeks, like I can do both for 6 weeks and then I'll be done. And then I went there and I got second in my age group. And so then I was kind of like, okay, like I guess there is kind of something here, but still like I was pretty far away from where the pros were at that point.
Right.
And you know, my coach is kind of like, dude, you got to do this. And I'm like, yeah, but no one in medicine cares about athletes. Most of them are out of shape anyways. And like most of them could also listen to their medical advice a lot. So I was like, I don't really think there's any value in like me doing this. It'll just take away from my studies. But as I kind of started to think about it, and as I talked to a lot of physicians, a kind of continual theme showed up, which is that in medicine, we're constantly looking for what's the greatest predictor of long-term success. Is it test scores? Is it where you went to college? Is it like your letters of recommendation? Is it how much research you've done? They've done all these studies to try and correlate, predictors with longer term success. And basically, the only thing that's been demonstrated to be significant is prior experience as an elite of some sort. So that's being an elite athlete, being one of the best musicians in the world, being like a world-renowned writer or poet, like being really, really good at something other than medicine. Because what that does is that in order to get to that spot, you had to develop a certain number of transferable skills and attitudes and whatnot. You know how to handle failure. You know what it takes to become the best. And so you then apply that to medicine. And so there was that part. And then also there's kind of this arms race in medicine that I'm sure we'll probably touch on for medical students to kind of set themselves apart. And they were like, hey, you know what? If you actually end up being really good at this, this is your ticket. Like everyone else is trying to get one more publication than the person before you, but you actually have something that's really unique. And so like, they're like, hey, like you might as well give it a shot. And so that's what I did. I was like, okay, I'll give it one season is what I told myself, like one season. And that was 2022. And it was a phenomenal season. I raced 5 times. I won the overall age group title in 4 of those races, including the world championship in Kona. And I got 3rd in the half Ironman world championships. And so like really like incredible year. And so at that point it was like, okay, well, there's clearly something here. Like as an amateur, I'm beating pros. Like in one of the races, I would have placed 4th as a pro, even though I was an age grouper. And so then I decided to switch and become a pro. And last year was my first year as a pro. And as a rookie, as you kind of alluded to in my first race, I had the 3rd fastest ever debut time for an Ironman athlete at Ironman Texas. I went 7 hours and 44 minutes. And then kind of at the end of the season, I got 11th at the World Championship as a pro and was ranked top 20 in the world, kind of in this overall ranking system. So it was really quite a phenomenal year. And, I'm continuing to do it, continuing to balance triathlon and medical school. And it's definitely becoming harder and harder. Some of that self-inflicted, but, I do like the challenge. And I think like where I'm at is an incredible gift and I want to kind of pursue it to the highest ability that I can. So that's kind of like where things have gone. And, how we got connected is, I think one of the coolest things about this triathlon pursuit is that it's really opened up this area of research that I'm really interested in. And I think has a lot of legs. And so basically what I'm interested in is the intersection between human performance and elite athletics and surgeon performance and healthcare performance and well-being. And so really what I think there's this incredible opportunity for is in healthcare. Historically, when we like look at quality improvement, I say that in quotes, we look at how can we prevent bad things from happening. So how do we prevent someone from leaving like scissors in someone's abdomen? Or how do we prevent someone from accidentally cutting off the wrong leg? Now, those are super important. Like we definitely need to avoid those bad things. But in some ways, I think that it's potentially the wrong way to look at things. Because let's take an athlete. Let's say you're a soccer player and your focus is all I care about is not scoring on my own goal. Is that going to lead to a good outcome? Probably not. I mean, like maybe you'll tie 0-0, but like all you're caring about is that you don't mess up. Instead of actually performing. And so really what I'm interested in is the flip side of kind of how healthcare is focused on quality and whatnot, which is how can we improve performance? And that's where like there's been very little work done, and that's where kind of human performance and sports kind of science can really play a huge role because No one's done it. Like these surgeons go in the operating room and they don't eat or drink anything for 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Now you tell me, I think anyone can't really function that well after 8
Yeah.
hours. And so, and
Not even 5 minutes.
right, exactly. And so like, that's kind of what I think's been really cool about my triathlon career is that I'm having this great experience right now being this elite athlete. But I think there's this really awesome potential for where things will lead me further down the road, kind of once this Ironman stuff is over with.
It'll never be over with. I'll tell you that. I've been doing Ironman for 20 years, and I'll tell you right now, there's a lot to unpackage on what you have just mentioned there. And let's kind of take a half step back. But you hit the main theme of just this podcast series itself is how can, physicians use human performance principles to improve their professional performance, but also their clients, right? Their patients, but more focused on the aforementioned. So for those who don't know, to be an Ironman, just an age grouper, the training time is typically 15 hours or plus a week. 15 is like literally the bare minimum. If you're a pro, it's closer to 25 to 30 hours a week. Just because when you're covering the distances of an Ironman, which is 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike, and a full marathon run. So, an average age grouper is 12 hours to finish. For a pro athlete to come in under 8 hours is like that's like the highest level of achievement because it happens, it's happening more and more, but to still be able to achieve it is you have to be very well trained. And then, so what we're talking about, okay, when you're trying to push yourself for 8, 12, 15 hours, or if you're in that golden hour, getting close to the 20th hour, my first time, you have to look at all the different domains of human performance that we're talking about, right? And, if we just stick to the traditional 5, which is, again, strength, recovery, sleep, nutrition, and cognitive, those are the 5 main ones that we typically talk about within Ironman. And this is what Matt has really been alluding to into it. So to be able to have that, you have to have those dialed in order to be able to do that well, especially when you're looking at these minute improvements, especially at the professional level, because you're already kind of at that asymptote for your genetic level, which for you is definitely a lot higher than most of us. But you're still looking for those incremental gains. You need to have everything right because 98% of your training is preparing the body for those last 2% gains. And so that's what it comes down to. And it's the same principles that can be applied to daily life. So that's kind of get off the soapbox on that, but that's what we're kind of talking about with, ultra distance, especially Ironman athletes. If you haven't done one, go out and do one. It's fun. So just taking that into context, so you're training, and of course it's going to ebb and flow based on part where you're at in the season, but you're having to balance, 25 plus hours of training plus med school. So you're roughly in your 4th year at this point, 3rd, 4th year, you're kind of on that upper end. So you're doing a little more, you're doing a little more rotations. Talk about kind of the time management piece of that, which honestly, that's another domain when we start talking about holistic, not just the performance principles. When we talk holistic, when we look at, the human being as a kind of a program of itself. So kind of talk to this. How do you work the time management piece of that? Because there's only 24 hours in a day and you have to spend at least half of it training sometimes.
Yeah. So it's a great question. That's what I like to call the $1 million question, because I think it's the one that I get asked the most, and it's also definitely the most important. And so really when, I think I want to say like 2 things about that is that, first, like as a slight sidetrack, is that one of the big problems in medicine is that we have this huge kind of epidemic, pandemic, because it does happen all over the world, of burnout, where, people are like literally their bodies are just like shutting down after a certain point, and they're like, I can't do this anymore. Like we have mental health problems. We have like there's physical problems. There are a lot of surgeons that have early onset chronic conditions like diabetes that's probably driven by excessive stress and things like that. And so kind of the irony, I think, of me pursuing these two really time-intensive things is that I actually think it helps prevent burnout for me. And the reason why I say that is that when I'm training, kind of an average weekday is about 4 hours a day. Weekends are about 6 hours. And that's just the exact training. And like, once you're kind of getting up into that levels, you also have to take into consideration that, hey, you need an extra hour of sleep. You need like probably to spend an extra 30, 45 minutes recovery. There's the time it takes to just set up your workout. Like a 6-hour workout, it probably takes me 45 minutes to like get all of my nutrition set up and figure everything out just to do the workout. And then there's a post-workout come down is what I call it, which probably takes another 45 to 60 minutes to recover from for some of these really hard workouts where just like cognitively you're completely like blasted and you like can't really function very well for a while. And so like it is, as you said, it is a significant time like strain or time block on each day. But the benefit of that is that it forces me to be incredibly efficient with the rest of the time in my day. So like, for example, kind of during the first 2 years, which are more lecture based, I would have classmates that would legitimately go to the library for 12 to 14 hours a day. Now, and like, I'm not like trying to say, demean them or anything, but like then they were getting average scores on their exams. And like, if you were truly studying at the top of your level for 12 to 14 hours a day, there is no reason why you shouldn't be number one in the class, because there's a lot of content, but there's not that much content. And so what that means is that they go to the library, they study for 30 minutes, go on Instagram for 10, studied for 45 minutes, go talk to friends in the lounge room for 15 to 20 minutes, which like is totally fine, but like they're not being very efficient with their time. They're letting their studying balloon into the time that they have, and they're confusing quantity over quality of studying in particular. And that's kind of where I think I have had a competitive advantage where, I like am working out like the whole morning, and then the afternoon comes around, I'm like, okay, I have to get these things done. Like it is like phone on do not disturb. I am focused on getting these things done. I'm going to put 100% effort into studying for 4 or 5 hours, and that's probably it. Because also after that time, I start to cognitively decline. And it's just, it's marginal benefit at that point. And so one of the big things that I'm a big proponent of is we talk about time management a lot, but I also really focus on energy management. And so what I mean by that is I put the things, there's probably 10 different things that I do in the course of a day when I'm kind of trying to lay out my day, which I now have like a pretty good framework for, so it doesn't take a ton of time. I think, okay, what are the things that require the most cognitive capacity, the most like mental motivation, the most physical capacity, like the metabolic side of things, like, those stuff, like what are the things that require the highest amounts and the lowest amounts of those? And then I place those over the course of the day based on when I will be the most efficient at doing those. So for example, I'm a morning person. And so like I am by far the most efficient in the morning versus the afternoon or the evening. So what that means is that like if I have a really hard workout, I'll probably put that in the morning because I need my motivation to be high and like I need to function well. But if I just have kind of more of a volume day, well, then I'll really focus on the morning on studying. And really knocking out as much of that like high cognitive load studying as possible. In contrast, emails I do in the afternoon or in the evening, generally. Because emails generally don't require a ton of mental capacity to do. You're just responding to someone. You don't really need to consolidate it. And so like it would be, in my opinion, it would be a huge waste of time to do emails in the morning where motivation, cognitive capacity, learning capacity is the highest, if I did emails during that time, because when I try and study later in the afternoon, I won't be as efficient. So I think that's really been a really big key is that, like there are some days where I do need to catch up, like I'm studying. And so what I'll do is I'll go to bed early the night before. I'll go to bed at like 7 and I'll wake up at like 4 or 5 and like knock out like 8 hours of really dedicated studying. And I'll be exhausted, probably take a nap and then do my workouts. And so that's kind of when I need my energy management. And that's like been, I think, a really big key to being able to do what I've done. So that's kind of one of the big parts. And just overall, like I think when you're looking at time management, we humans have a natural tendency to kind of, I guess, be as productive as time allows, or kind of let what they do fit into space. Like it's like a gas. If you give gas like a bigger container, it's going to fill that space. And so like if you have 2 hours to do an assignment, there's a good chance you'll probably take 2 hours to do it. But if you only have an hour and you can get that assignment done in an hour, you'll do it in an hour. And so I think that's actually where triathlon becomes beneficial, is that it forces you to be efficient. I guess it either, if you're inefficient, then you're not going to get sleep, and then you're going to get injured, and like there's going to be this vicious cycle, or you're going to be efficient with what you do. And so that's really what I focus on, is being really efficient with my time, and really kind of trying to protect my time to the best that I can, so that I can get the stuff done that needs to be done. So,
excellent. Yeah, that's a good that's a good rundown. Yeah, especially when you have the freedom to be able to do that, and you're very aware of yourself, and to be able to do that. And it's interesting that you have that awareness of the cognitive side. So when you're better, better. Some people are better in the afternoon, some are midday. At least you're aware of that, and you're optimizing that to the best of your ability. So, and you've hit on one of the other big ones that we've talked about on over half the season inadvertently, is sleep. So we're not going to go down that. If people have been listening to this, I mean, for the past 3 episodes, we've talked about sleep somehow, some way. But the fact that you're saying that you target 8, but you'll try to get 9 if you need to. That's amazing. Especially for the recovery aspect, that hits back to the point in our last episode. So if you don't know what we're talking about, go back and listen to the previous episode where we talked about nutrition and sleep. And then let's talk about that last one, nutrition, right? So you're already in a 12-hour day that is jam-packed. And you've got everything pretty much, it seems like, down to almost the minute, which is fine. You need to, especially when you're a long course athlete. Don't miss those days. How do you work your nutrition, right? Especially, not just, and let's take it out of the academic context. Especially, let's talk about more when you're in the hospital context, right? So you're in that environment. How do you work your nutrition?
Yeah, so it's really challenging, to be perfectly honest. And that's one of the things that I'm really interested in doing this research on, is trying to figure out some ways to do better. Because I think one of the things that people miss the most is hydration. So, like, especially in the operating room, you can't drink while you're in there. And so like I will, the operating room is like a double-edged sword, because you can't drink, but you also don't want to drink before you go in, because you don't want to have to use the restroom while you're in there. So there's this kind of culture, intentional or not, of dehydration. And that just makes you feel like crap. And then there's also there's this one hospital near us, not OSU, that even for non-surgical settings, they're you're not allowed to have drinks on the floor. And I'm like, what's the purpose of this? If someone has a closed container, why are we doing this? Why are the only consequence is that people are going to get kidney stones, and they're not going to perform to their best. But anyways, so from a nutritional standpoint, I kind of focus on hydration's huge. I think that's one of the most underappreciated, under-focused on areas. Since I'm working out a lot, I shoot for actually 4 liters of water a day.
Okay.
I think, most women should probably be having 2. Most men should probably be shooting for 3 liters a day.
Yep.
Not including like coffee. And but
What?
I think most people are probably like half of that. And
Yeah.
so like hydration is like a really, really important part. And so like what I'll do sometimes is I'll even take like a little water bottle and put it in my scrubs or whatever, so that I have something with me. And then also I focus on having bars with me. So like a protein bar. And I don't use those as my predominant source, but they're as an emergency source more so than anything else. So my general day, like I try and have a breakfast and then a lunch and then a dunch, which is like a mid-afternoon meal, and then a dinner and then a supper. So the supper is just kind of like a protein shake. There's been a lot of work that's shown like a low calorie, so about 200 calorie, high protein, moderate fat, low carb kind of source before you go to bed can actually help improve lean muscle mass and recovery in general.
One of the leading researchers that is Dr. Ormsby out of Florida State. Yeah, he's done a lot of that research in the nighttime feeding.
Yep. And so it's, it's a little counterintuitive because you're actually adding more calories to a day, but it actually has benefits. Because I think it keeps your metabolism up and enables your body to repair and everything. But so the point being is that like I shoot ideally I'm eating about every 3 to 4 hours. Is kind of one of the goals. And really focus on like high nutrient kind of diet for the most part. So I try and avoid processed stuff except for when I'm training. And so I focus on kind of a little bit higher carb content in the morning. And then as the day goes on, slightly lower carb, slightly higher fat, slightly higher protein as the day goes on. If you can kind of think of that as a continuum, it's kind of generally how I do it. And then, but yeah, nutrition is super important. I've found that like when I'm stressed or whatever, and I have a tendency to go for the chips or like treat or whatever that's kind of sitting there, like I feel worse and I perform worse as a result. And so, I definitely think it's something that like it should be focused on. And everyone's a little different. Like what's going to work for everyone is slightly different, but I do think that no matter who you are, going 8 hours over the course of the day and not eating anything is not going to lead to optimal performance. So that's the one thing that I'll say. And it's also like, I know that there's intermittent fasting and everything, but at least for my line of work, that's just asking for injury.
And let's, kind of one of the things, let's, relate to kind of what you just said, right? So in your context, we're talking about really optimizing your nutrition because, again, you're a professional athlete. But for us normal people, you've given a lot of insights, and you talk about it because at least you're planning it. So you have an idea what you need to take with you. So you're planning, you're packing as necessary. You have, and at least in my field, we call it a to-go bag, that rescue bar. And that kind of really relates very well with what Laura said an episode or two ago. So if you guys have listen to that one, that's where Laura and I talk about nutrition. She's saying you don't have to be perfect all the time, right? At all. Sometimes it's just the lesser of two evils.
Yep.
And
totally agree on that one.
It's that Cliff Bar or that protein bar that you have, right? And so even professional athletes have to make those same choices at the same time. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And that's just great. So hydration, nutrition. I mean, so those are the crux. I'm going to ask this question. And what is your typical caloric intake?
Yeah. So the way I do it is actually pretty dynamic. And the way I do it is that I shoot for a base level of calories, which is about 2,100 calories a day. That's kind of the breakfast, lunch, lunch, dinner, supper. and then I add calories predominantly based on what my workouts are. So,
Okay.
before every workout, I have a banana, and then
Yeah.
after every workout, I'll have a banana and a protein shake. And actually, one of the things that's super interesting is that as an endurance athlete, you actually need a surprisingly high amount of protein, because your body is so catabolic, that you need protein to prevent muscle loss,
Yes.
because you're doing so much working out. So, like my nutritionist is like, yeah, you basically need the amount of protein that a bodybuilder would have in a certain day.
So about 1.7 to 2.0 grams per kilo. Yep.
Yeah. And so like I have I have that before and after the workouts. And then during the workouts, I kind of have found what works the best for me, depending on the intensity and the focus of the workout. So if it's just like a moderate volume workout, I'll have my banana at the start. I'll kind of just do like an electrolyte type drink for the first 45 to 60 minutes. And then I'll switch over to probably about 40 to 50 grams of 40 to 50 grams of carbs per hour after that. Now, if it's a high intensity workout where we're doing lactate or something like that, that's when I really start to push the power or push the fueling, and I'll push up to 160 grams of carbs an hour.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm fortunate that I have a very strong stomach. And
I was just going to ask that. Yeah.
I can now, another question is if I'm oxidizing all of that or not. So one day I hope to get into a lab and actually see if I'm actually utilizing all of those carbs or not. Yeah. But my kind of thought right now is that, hey, I'm not having GI distress with this many carbs per hour, so I might as well do it. But anyways, so if it's a kind of a quality workout, then I'll push much higher carb loads. And it's almost all carbs. I mean, I think for some amateurs that are pushing 15 plus hours or whatever, it's okay to have a little bit of fat and a little bit of protein in there, because you're out on the bike and the run for so long. But as a professional, I'm done like 8 hours, and it's just pure. I'm just burning pure carbs. In terms of my intake, and then I'm burning fat as well, kind of internally, but it's better just to intake only carbs for someone like me.
Well, that's the other thing too, kind of understanding. So there's a big difference between when we talk about the power outputs. Let's just talk the bike itself. So power is the metric that primarily we use in the field to measure, efforts and such, because it's a non-discriminatory physics metric. And so, but most people, let's say your lactate threshold, your functional threshold, or which equates to your lactate threshold is, 200 watts, for us normal human beings, which could be at, 2.0 or to 2.2 watts per kilogram. Someone like you is probably closer to 5, if not higher. So you're able to push more watts for a longer period of time. So that's more calories per hour versus here. That explains the huge delta between those types of efforts. Just for those who don't understand, kind of what the fundamentals of what Matt's talking about.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Yeah, man, this is great. So, I mean, we're kind of getting towards the end here. So I kind of want to. You straddle two worlds. You straddle, the everyday stresses of a medical student. You straddle the world of being a professional athlete. And I love those days. Were some of the best days of my life being a pro cyclist. But, we're back down to being a normal human being. What is some of the advice that you could give to some of us normal human beings in the medical profession?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think you kind of had, I think for medical students in particular was kind of some of the stuff that I thought about, which is I think at least in the US, I think that medicine has become somewhat conformist, and we have a lot of people, you're kind of groomed from undergrad as a pre-med major onward to here's the information, memorize it, regurgitate. And I see that in my classmates, and I think one of the big things that I would really encourage people is to be curious, and to constantly ask why, and to try and understand, not to know, but to understand. And I think that's what has made me successful as a triathlete and as a medical student, is that I'm constantly trying to understand how the world works, understand how my own body works, and how my own body responds to different things. And I think that's kind of led me down some really, really awesome paths. And the other thing I think as well that we haven't touched on at all is I think the value of having mentors and experts that you consult with. So really, honestly, the thing that has made me able to do both in many ways is that I have a coach in triathlon, and I have outsourced anything related to triathlon to him. He tells me, he sends me my workouts, and I do them. And I have a very high level, and we talk, kind of say like, okay, this workout went well, this is what I thought went well, whatnot. But he kind of then takes that and then figures it out, because he's my expert in the triathlon domain. And outsourcing that to other people, I think, is really, really valuable, because it enables you to cognitively and time-wise have more time to focus on the stuff that's most important to you. And I think that that's highly applicable to other areas of life. I think, when you can outsource, when you can find someone who is better than you, go learn from them, and kind of work with them instead of just trying to do it all yourself. I think that's kind of one of the big things. And then as well, I think one of my overall attitudes with how I approach life is there's kind of twofold to it. One is that I think like you should do stuff that you enjoy, and you should focus on quality of your life, and quality of how you're spending your time. And so, without going into sleep, that was a big thing that I switched in college, that I was like, hey, you know what? I'd much rather have an extra hour of sleep and enjoy the day significantly more than stay up and just shoot the shit with my friend for an extra hour and then be miserable the next day. So that's kind of what I'm talking about in terms of like focusing on the quality of the time that you spend awake versus the quantity of the time that you spend awake. Okay. And then the other thing is kind of something that I was told, kind of my swim coach harped on in college, is like, to be elite. If you want to be elite in one thing, you really should be striving to be elite in everything. And what that means is like, if you want to be elite as a doctor or as an Ironman professional, or just like as the best dad or mom, like you really need to apply that to like all areas of your life. Because if you don't, the weaknesses or kind of the things that you aren't focusing on in those other areas will creep in. Like, for example, again, like if I had said, hey, all I want to do is be the best Ironman triathlete out there, then I probably wouldn't study as much as I do. And like maybe am not focusing as much on sleep or whatever. And so maybe I'm not recovering as well as a result. And so even though I want to have the best workouts, the other areas of my life are preventing me from doing that. So I really think you need to focus on kind of your goals holistically, and really trying to be the best that you can in all aspects instead of just one aspect of your life. So those are kind of my things.
No, that's great. That's a great piece of advice. I mean, even we have several listeners that are long in the tooth in their medical career that love some of the advice we're giving here and just listening and chatting. So that's great to hear. So, well, Matt, thank you so much for your time. This has been a blast. And like I said, I always learn something when I speak with you. It's great. Let's hope we beat Michigan this year and get back at it. All right. Hey, man, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks so much.
And see everyone on the next episode of WCW. Have a great one. The views expressed by myself and the guests of this podcast do not reflect the official policy or position of the U.S. Air Force, Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.